after her twin sister killed the princess of the capital circle. She chose to commit suicide by jumping into the sea for fear of reprisals. Mom and Dad had no choice but to push me out to the crown prince to vent their anger. I was tortured by the prince for 3 whole years. But the prince advertised to the public that he was in love with me and wanted to give me the grandest wedding. At the wedding, my dead twin sister came back. She changed into my wedding dress and looked smug. I was the one who killed the princess of the capital circle. So the position of the crown princess of the capital circle should also be mine. It's time for you to return everything to me. She teamed up with Mom and Dad and tried to push me into the sea so that I would be left with no bones. But what they don't know is this. The prince wanted to marry me in order to abuse me even more recklessly. I waited 3 whole years for the day of the golden cicada. When Nala, who had been dead for 3 years, stood in front of me. I pinched my thighs in death before I could barely control myself from laughing out loud. Even dressed as a waitress, she was still as proud as a swan. It seems that during these 3 years of faking her death, she was raised well by my parents. And the more shocked my expression was, the more the person in front of me laughed with glee. She walked towards me step by step. Sister, these 3 years, it was hard for you to bear George's anger for me. But now, I'm back. So don't take up the position that belongs to me. At the same moment, my parents walked in from behind her. They had a look of lust. Lena, don't blame us. Your sister killed George's sister. We were afraid that he would get angry and take revenge. That's why we had to let Nala fake her death. Besides, Nala, if I hadn't given you this opportunity, George would have fallen in love with you. Nala heard this and nodded her head justifiably. The person who killed the princess of the capital circle was me. So the position of the crown princess of the capital circle should also be mine. It's time for you to return everything to me. After saying this, she and my mom directly rushed over and stripped the wedding dress off of me, while my dad stepped forward and covered my mouth, dragging me next to the guardrail of the cruise ship. Nala's eyes were full of smugness. Lena, I was going to let you off the hook. But on reflection, only the dead can keep a secret. You'd better go to hell. After saying that, they directly pushed me off the cruise ship. The moment I fell, the look of terror on my face instantly disappeared. No one knew that George married me only to abuse me more legitimately. I've been waiting for this day of gold for 3 years. The speedboat that had been arranged rescued me after the cruise ship had driven out some distance. I went to the house in my name as I had planned, then turned on my computer and found George's email. After hitting send, I turned back on the live stream of this magnificent wedding, and then lay back on my bed with a long sigh of relief. A smile lingered at the corners of my lips. In the live broadcast, Nala was wearing that holy and incomparable wedding dress, standing beside George with a sweet face. Compared to me, who was familiar with him, Nala's every move was slightly rusty and awkward. In front of everyone, George scratched her nose. What's going on today? Haven't we rehearsed this many times? Even though I had already escaped, I couldn't help but get goosebumps when I heard this tender and loving tone. George was already angry. But Nala doesn't know it. She looks down and twines her fingers. I'm too nervous. All the watchers swiped comments underneath saying how happy they were. The story of Cinderella marrying the prince shone into reality, where the camera swept by. My mom and dad, who had worked so hard for their little girl, were also moved to red eyes. They thought all their plans were seamless. But if I hadn't secretly let them on the cruise ship, they wouldn't have even gotten in the door. Nala and I are twins. But since birth, she has been inexplicably favored by her parents, which has led to the development of her unruly and willful temper. When she started school, she had no idea what to do with Zoe, who was known as the princess of the capital circle, and she took advantage of her personality to bully her more and more. It was also at that school party that she pushed Zoe down a 3-story spiral staircase out of jealousy. Zoe knocked her head and died on the spot. The Kin family was furious and tried to settle the score with her, and she decided to fake her death by jumping into the sea in retaliation. When George came to the door, Nala's body was already gone. Mom and Dad were afraid that the Kin family would be angry with them, so they decided to push me out. You and Nala look the same. You will kneel for her 2 more times to beg for forgiveness from the Kin family. A human life. Is it kneeling twice to beg for forgiveness? I've been abused for 3 years. I thought it was my life's work to pay off Nala's debt. But to my surprise, I came home by chance once and heard Nala laughing with Mom and Dad, just as George and Nala were exchanging rings. The email I had arranged was sent. At the same moment, George's cell phone rang. This workaholic doesn't miss any emails. Even at a wedding. His assistant ran up and handed him his cell phone quietly. And George gently said to Nala, "Wait for me." The moment he saw the contents of the email, George's face suddenly changed. I laughed. "Nala, you've kept George in the dark for so many years. It's time to let the truth come out." George froze for a while until his assistant whispered a reminder next to him. George's eyes slowly moved to Nala's body. Then inch by inch he measured her for a closer look and could still notice the growing excitement under George's eyes. George walked towards her step by step. His hands hanging down at his side were shaking slightly. Some sharp-eyed netizens began to marvel when they noticed. Wow, it turns out that a man standing at the tip of the pyramid will also be so nervous that his hands shake when he marries the woman he loves. Looks like Nala is really marrying the right person. I laughed. Shaky hands? George grew up with his sister. And Zoe was the apple of his eye. After Zoe's death, Mom and Dad had me pretend to be Nala and take George's wrath. Not realizing that he'd been taking revenge on the wrong person for 3 years. Now knowing that the real killer of his sister has been on the loose. How can he stand it? Following the hints in my email, George's grip on Nala's hand tightened violently when he saw the crescent-shaped birthmark on Nala's neck. There was an exclamation of pain and a petulant George. George looked straight at her and gently stroked Nala's cheek with his right hand. The MC who was there to perform the wedding was still exclaiming that the groom was mesmerized by his bride. I was the only one who laughed softly. George should have already started slowly planning how to get back at Nala. So, it wasn't in vain that I went through all the trouble of finding Zoe being pushed down the stairs. This video is my first big gift to them. I hope they like it. Counting the time. Mom and Dad were about to get off the cruise ship. So I slowly made my way back to the house and sure enough, not long after, Mom and Dad walked in the door, laughing and talking. Our plan was perfect. And I was relieved to see that Nala was happy. Who says it isn't? This is the baby of our family. It's not easy. Now my heart can finally be put in my stomach. Come on. Let's have a celebration banquet for the old couple today. I hooked the corner of my lips and walked out of the room unhurriedly to say that the celebration banquet doesn't include me. I stood in place and looked at them with a smile. The two of them looked at each other. Followed by screaming. Ghosts. 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 Lena came to claim her life. Lena, don't blame us. If you want to blame us, you shouldn't have asked us to be your mom and dad. Just go. Big deal. We'll bring you some more paper money. As they talked, they actually kowtowed Ed to me. I stood still and didn't move. The bloodline kinship between us has long disappeared when they resolutely pushed me into the sea. Quietly listening to their screams before I stepped on my heels in front of them, I looked at them with a smile on my face. Dad. Mom. Open your eyes and take a good look. You're disappointed that I'm not dead. They both looked at each other. But his eyes looked as if they were even more desperate. You. How did you not die? My mom's eyes instantly widened and several times at that. You're still alive. They both stood up together. And their first reaction was to call Nala to air out the situation unsurprisingly. There was a busy signal all the way over there. After all, George is going to sanction her properly. Mom, this is what you do not understand. Nala is not easy to marry George. Now it is the time of honey. How will pick up your phone? My mom's mouth opened and closed. Unable to say a word. The hate that had been bottled up in my chest for 3 years was finally released at this moment. and I stared at them coldly. Didn't we say we have a celebration dinner? So let's continue. These two people had slowed down for a while, and weren't so scared anymore. So they simply broke the pot and sat on the sofa with a big grin. What's there to celebrate? I laughed softly and said nonchalantly, of course it's a celebration. George finally caught the culprit. After saying that, I rolled up my sleeves, revealing my arms, which were densely covered with scars. Guess why I wore long sleeves in these 3 years? No matter spring or summer? After seeing the scars on my arms, both of their eyes flashed with a hint of horror. How come? Didn't you show your love on the internet every day? And didn't George treat you well? Don't lie here. You just can't see your sister living better than you. I raised my eyebrows and said word for word, how could you guys take the bait if you weren't so hairy? My parents finally realized that things were bad. They started calling like crazy. But none of them could get through. 2 people began to turn around in the living room in a hurry. My mom's tears could not help but fall. I watched quietly. My heart grew colder and colder. When George first came to the door, Mom and Dad couldn't wait to push me out. In the past 3 years, not to mention phone calls, not even a text message. And at this point, looking at the way they treated Nala, I realized once and for all that my parents didn't love me. Watching them go crazy looking for someone to contact Lena. Finally, as their eyes grew desperate, I had the good sense to show them the surveillance. Is this what you want to see? In this surveillance footage, Nala is tied up by George by the pool in the backyard of the villa. The sun was high above her head and Nala was so red from the sun that she was close to fainting. Mom and Dad were in tears when they saw it. Didn't this George love you so much? How could he do this to your sister? Nala. My child. How can you stand such a hot day? You quickly give George a call and ask him to put your sister down. I smiled and comforted her. What's the hurry? It'll be cooler in a while. Sure enough. Before they could ask why, Nala was suddenly kicked into the pool. She was tied up with a rope, and could only struggle in the water like a worm. My parents, on the other hand, were so shocked that they screamed and grabbed my cell phone. No. No. Hurry up and fish her out. Nala doesn't know how to swim. She's going to die if she goes on like this. I smiled with satisfaction. I knew George had a lot of ways of torturing people. What's the point of just hanging out in the sun? Luckily, he didn't let me down. There were snakes in that pool, in addition to water. I'm like, Mom probably knew it was useless to rush, and started begging me with red eyes. Mom knows that you hate us, and also knows that you must have a way to call him quickly to let him fish your sister up. It can't be like this. Rich people can catch people like this. I admired her anxious look, then reassured them that George wouldn't let Nala die like that. In the midst of Mom and Dad's horrified expressions, I slowly said, what about 3 years? Just let Nala take her time and enjoy it all. Unexpectedly, George emailed me back. Lena. Even though I was prepared for it, I couldn't help but feel nervous for a moment when I saw those 2 words. George is the crown prince of the capital circle. No matter whether it's connections or resources, it's an existence that can cover the sky with one hand. He learned the truth after a little investigation, can realize that he abused the wrong person for 3 years. Then he can also find out that the person who sent the email is me. I have also been waiting for him to come to me. I returned. Let's leave the past aside for now. Do you want to cooperate in the future? I finally smiled when I looked at the good word that came back in seconds from across the room. George and these 3 people in my family deserve to die. But I have to work with George now. I was going to make my parents watch their favorite little girl suffer. The next morning, Mom and Dad broke down and brought breakfast to my bedroom door. They both fawned over me in the most flattering way possible, taking care of me as I ate my breakfast. Tentatively, Lena, Mom and Dad know it's wrong. It was a mistake to push you into the sea when they were so deluded and larded up. What are you trying to say? Mom and Dad then looked at each other, carefully said, can you go and change your sister back? People really do laugh out loud when they're speechless. Mom and Dad promise that this is the last time. In the future, no matter what kind of glorious life you live, we will not bother you again. We just want to meet your sister. Bring your sister. I opened the surveillance screen on George's side and casually swept it. What's the hurry? You will be able to see your daughter soon. That afternoon, George knocked on my door with Nala. My parents' plan had been forced to end, and George's and my plan had just begun. The moment Mom and Dad saw George, they unconsciously took 2 steps backwards. Even when they saw their favorite little daughter standing in the doorway, they didn't dare to come forward. Only I knew that my parents were so frightened and that both their legs were fighting. Finally, it was Nala who cried out, "Mom and Dad, I want a divorce." George just looked back at her, and she trembled, unable to say a word. George spoke slowly and methodically. Nala is like an overgrown child. She's married and still crying for Mom and Dad. This is why I brought her back to stay with us for 2 days. Mom and Dad dare not say a word, nodded their heads and let these 2 people come in. My mom to serve tea and water. Busy serving. When Nala got home, she managed to relax and tried to get a drink of water. But George coughed softly next to her. She immediately put down her glass of water and knelt honestly at George's feet. My mom turned her head and wiped a handful of tears, gritted her teeth and followed suit. "Mr. Kin, my eldest daughter has been abused for 3 years. Even if it's a deep grudge, we can end it here. Can you be generous and let my youngest daughter go? She was young and ignorant before. It's all because of our head writer's poor teaching. Please let our family go." My parents and Nala kneeled on the ground together. I watched coldly from the side, and George's face was even harder to see. A few moments later, he helped my mom up, although there was a smile on his face. The smile did not reach the bottom of his eyes. "What are you talking about? There is no elder to kowtow to the younger generation. Quickly get up." My mom came up with an obstinate nature, and boldly shook off George's hand. "Mr. Kin, we are just ordinary people. We are no match for you. We can only ask for forgiveness in this way. If you don't forgive us, we will always kneel here." The smile at the corner of George's lips gradually converged. After a few moments, he slowly said, "Good. Nala, do you want to kneel together?" I laughed. They really thought that George would eat such a low-level moral abduction? George was hungry and ordered 8 dishes for Nala to make. But when she's at home, she doesn't dip her fingers in the water. And when she enters the kitchen, she gets splattered with oil crackling all over her. How many times did my mom want to help? But I was there to remind her. "Mom, people want to eat their wife's handmade food. You don't have to get involved." George glanced at her, then faintly answered, "Kneel if you like. Maybe I'll really forgive you guys sometime." As soon as this was said, my mom's knees that had just been raised went back down. George went to the bedroom to take care of his work, and I went to the kitchen to watch the show. Nala's hands and feet were in a terrible mess. When she saw me, she gasped and slashed her kitchen knife on the counter. "When I wanted to switch with you, you pretended to be reluctant. But in reality, you were already happy in your heart. You were just waiting for me to come along, weren't you?" I nodded and smiled non-committal lie. Nala was flailing in the kitchen, but didn't dare to raise her voice. "I really haven't seen anyone with a heart as big as yours. You pushed your own sister into the fire. Do you have a clear conscience?" Seeing her righteous indignation, I nodded in tandem. I stepped forward and grabbed her hair so hard that she had to look straight at me. "The person with a heavier heart than me. Isn't it you? In order to get away with it, you went so far as to work together to devise a play where you jumped into the sea and faked your death. To trick me into it yet. Now you deserve all this. You deserve it." Nala was enraged by my words, and immediately yelled angrily at the top of her voice. "How can I be blamed for this? Who let Zoe die in a fall? What kind of princess of the capital circle? She doesn't even have that princess life. It's her own fault for not being lucky enough to enjoy such a good life." She said that while pushing me away fiercely. I stumbled backward 2 steps. but was held by a pair of large hands on my arms. I instantly stirred up goose and didn't need to turn around to know who the person holding me up was. Sure enough, a familiar voice came from behind me. Is that so? Well, let's see how lifeless you are then. Nala screamed and raised the kitchen knife. But she was no match for the enraged George, who dragged her to the living room like a dead dog. My parents were so distraught that they knelt beside him, unable to do anything but plead desperately for mercy. Unfortunately, George had run out of patience. He grabbed the food Nala had made and shoved it into Nala's mouth. A whole pot of unpeeled prawns, a whole plate of crabs with thorns were just sent hard into her mouth. Nala's mouth soon became dripping with blood. My parents were so anxious to get on board, but were scared back by George's grim tone. You guys want a taste too, don't you? With a single word, both of them were afraid to move. Nala fell to her knees and vomited out blood. My mom was so anxious that she pushed me behind her back. Do you have a conscience? Hurry up and help your sister. I spoke coolly. Why? I've suffered more injuries than this. What is this? After 2 plates were stuffed in, Nala fell to her knees and cried out in pain, holding her stomach. But George was already red-eyed. He grabbed Nala's hair and asked word by word, then when you bullied Chokya, why didn't you think about whether she was in pain or not? I was wrong. Tears and snot mixed together on Nala's face. I know I was wrong. I shouldn't have treated her like that. George half squinted his eyes and clenched his teeth. After a few moments of hesitation, he dragged Nala by her hair up to the 2nd floor of my house. Standing at the stairway, Nala shook her head with trembling. What do you want? Killing is against the law. George laughed. I want to see if your life is hard. After saying that, he kicked Nala's leg. Nala fell down the stairs in a heap. My dad exclaimed and ran up, trying to stop the tumbling Nala. Unfortunately, he ended up getting hit by Nala as well, and the two of them rolled down the stairs together. My mom sat on her butt, bawling. George stood tall with a smile on his lips, looking like a demon. My mom tried to call an ambulance but was denied. George's family doctor came to the house to give both of them a checkup and froze when he saw me. It's also true. After all, a character who was lying on the ground before was all me. Mr. Kin, the two of you only have some broken bones. Nothing serious. As for this one, some bleeding in the digestive tract. Just take some medicine. Hearing the doctor speak so glibly, my mom anxiously stretched her neck to retort. What's not a big problem? People are like this. And you still say it's not serious. As a doctor, do you have any professional ethics at all? George looked at him askance, then waved his hand and let the family doctor go. It's nothing compared to what I've suffered before. George loves his sister. Every year on the anniversary of Zoe's death, I've been tortured to death. And several times I've been brought back from the dead by this doctor. George threw the medication the doctor prescribed at them. Get well and continue. Hearing this, Nala, who had just come to her senses, once again rolled her eyes and fell into a coma. George went upstairs, and I lowered my eyes to hide my hatred. Hate George. How can I? This pit of fire is my family pushed me into. But all those harm is all George put on me little by little. Even if he killed someone, he will be punished by the law. No matter what. It's not his turn to imprison someone and torture them. A day later, both my father and Nala were gradually regaining consciousness. I overheard them plotting at the door. How are we going to live from now on? Are we going to be tortured by him over and over again? I can't go on for another day. Can we call the police? Nala cried and said, if the police are useful. He still dares to bully us so blatantly? The room fell into silence. As long as we get him and Lena killed together, our family of 3 can live happily and peacefully as before. My mom chimed in. Yes. I agree. I've seen that bitch Lena for a long time. Why can she just stand there and watch while the 3 of us are bullied? I say let's make it big. Let's do it. I tiptoed back to my bedroom, Looking at myself in the mirror, I couldn't get the corners of my lips to let go. They were willing to take the risk to help me take revenge. Why wouldn't I be happy about it the next whole day? They were unusually peaceful. In the room at night, before going to bed. After they confirmed that everything was fine, I cut off the bed sheet and tied it into a long strip, and placed it down the window. In the dead of night, I crept down and hid. Sure enough, an hour later the three men came sneaking out as well. My mom and Nala stood at a distance while my dad spread oil all over the living room and threw a fire in. The fire was instantly so big it could have consumed a man. In the distance, I could still hear the three of them laughing maniacally. I recorded the video on my phone and laughed silently as well. They'd helped me get revenge, and had put themselves completely out of the picture. I called 911. Only the house was pretty much burned down by the time the firemen arrived. Nala played the role of the virtuous wife. As soon as the firemen arrived, she collapsed on the floor, crying, "Please hurry up and go in and save my husband. He's alone in there. We just got married," she said. She was going to rush inside by herself. Of course, the firefighters stopped her. The family cried a lot. But the moment George's charred body was taken out of the house, all three of them paused in their cries. As soon as the news broke that George had died in the fire, it alarmed the entire circle. Reporters have also approached Nala in droves. "May I ask what you think about the fire? Why is it that there are 4 people in the family and only Mr. Chin died? Do you think it was an act of God or man-made when it happened so soon after the wedding? As Mr. Kin's wife, you will receive a large amount of inheritance. And now all parties are suspecting that the fire is a conspiracy. Can you respond positively?" On the TV, Nala cried so much that she couldn't even stand up. She angrily reprimanded the reporter. "How could I do that kind of thing? You all saw on the internet. We just got married. How much we love each other. Everyone knows. If I can, I really want to trade my life for George's life." Ooh. She was crying in a way that was really moving. In their own home, cold eyes watched their family of 3. Nala has been closeted for a month to make it believable, occasionally caught by reporters. She also looked haggard. Over time, everyone was almost fooled by this look of hers. As the timeline lengthened, fewer and fewer people paid attention to the incident. About the time they estimated, the family ran back to George's house. Looking at the 3 people who were enjoying themselves recklessly on the surveillance screen, I smiled coldly. Murder and arson. Is it such a simple thing for them? Almost all of the properties under George's name were dominated by them. 3 people enjoy endless wealth, all day in the home to have fun. I, on the other hand, began to organize evidence. The 3 of them together sued the court surveillance screen. The 3 of them received the lawyer's letter. How a tiger's body shook. Lena did not die in the fire. How can her lawyers sue us intentional homicide? The 3 of them sat around and studied it for a while. In the end, it was Nala who tentatively dialed my phone number. I hooked my lips and picked up the phone. After enjoying it for so long, it's time to let the truth come out now. The 3 people in the monitor stood up in fear. Nala's voice was a little shaky. You are a human or a ghost? Didn't you die in the fire with George?" I didn't answer her words, but asked, "Do you know what it means to die in a great disaster? It's the 3rd time I've come back from the dead under them. 3 times. They've wanted me dead. It's your turn." Separately, there's the video of Nala pushing George's sister down the stairs. The 3 of them together throwing me overboard from a cruise ship. And the last one of the 3 of them together setting a fire. Whichever one of these was enough to make them lose their reputation. As soon as the videos were released, they received widespread attention. Everyone was in shock. So Nala got someone's sister killed 3 years ago. Then 3 years later married George instead of her twin sister. Then threw her own sister into the sea with her mom and dad? Now that they got fame and fortune, this family is trying to find ways to burn George to death? What a vicious family. Who doesn't know that George's parents died early and George is the only one in the Big Kin family now? Are they trying to eat the extinct family? The online comments were one-sided in favor of me. When the mood of everyone's atmosphere reached its peak, I recorded a video. In the video, I calmly talked about all the inhuman abuses I had suffered in the past 3 years. George, who was already dead, was dragged out and flogged by me, and netizens who had sympathized with him also turned against me. And my parents and Nala. They didn't even dare to leave the house before the trial. Knowing the evidence was overwhelming, they started calling and texting me every day. I didn't answer any of them. It's just that what they said will be used as evidence in court. When the trial started, that family of 3 played poor in court at first. But when all the evidence was in front of them, they couldn't defend themselves and simply started attacking indiscriminately. Lena, you're a scheming whore. Water and fire can't kill you. Are you a human being or a ghost? Now isn't this all manipulated by you personally? You're the one who is the ultimate player behind everyone. You had it coming to you to be abused. Who made you look exactly like me? And this judge. People with no third sense shouldn't be judges. And you honor the presiding judge. Do you know how to judge a case? The 3 of us in the end were the wrong. People do not own heaven and earth, no. And netizens have begun to propose that they be shot on the spot. On the day they were taken to prison, many people threw rotten eggs and leaves at them. The police escort couldn't stop them. So Nala scolded them again. What are you guys doing? Don't you have a gun in your hand? Shoot them. Shoot them all. After this story spread, everyone started saying that Nala was out of her mind. I was so satisfied with what I saw on the internet that I decided to go to the prison myself. When I saw the 3 of them, Nala was still cursing like a madman. I looked at her with a smile. Looks like the internet was really right. Nala spat a big mouthful of spit at me through the glass. You're as disgusting as this spit. Can you stop appearing in front of me? Don't think I'll be sentenced to death. This whole thing is simply a case of wrongdoing. I pushed you into the water because it was supposed to be a good time for me. And what's wrong with me taking back what's mine? I set the fire is more because of self-help. Keely person only. What is wrong with me? From the beginning to the end she is a look of justification. I simply shook my head. Then you wait to vindicate yourself. Nala bristled with disdain. But without warning, my mom dropped to her knees. The move stunned the prison guards. Lena, I know you hate us. But I at least gave birth to you and raised you. Will you help me one last time? I was a bit curious. So I let her continue. You only have one sister. You 2 are twins. You grew up together. How can you bear to see her executed? Your father and I confessed to all the crimes. Let her out. Okay? She has already lost her reputation. Even if she goes out, she can't do you any harm. Be generous. As a sister to let her sister a little. Mom got out to you. I smiled to myself. Maybe I should have guessed it a long time ago. They both know how to be parents and how to love their children. It's just that they never wanted to share that love with me. Nala was still shouting from the side, Mom and Dad. Don't beg this beast. The law will naturally clear my name. We don't need to beg her. I nodded. That's right. The law won't accuse anyone, but it won't let anyone off the hook either. I ignored them, turned around and left. Willful murder plus attempted murder is enough to sentence them to death. I, on the other hand, left the city after the dust had settled, taking the money I had amassed over the past 3 years with me. I heard that places with the sea are always more romantic. So I bought a house with a sea view in a coastal city. And realized the cat and dog again. When the scars on my body started to itch, my cat always rubbed its furry head against my side. I guess in the future, I'll always cuddle my cat and dog like this and listen to the sound of the waves as I fall asleep.